We'll be picking up on Chapter 7 of Burying the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by Daniel Hopsicker. The Third Gorge. The Bay of Pigs adventure marked for the first time in agency's history that its army of hired adventurers were extensively employed inside the United States. Just what, we wondered, had been the qualifications for being hired as a hired adventurer. We recalled Paul Newman's famous question in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid: who are those guys? Were they like relief pitchers in baseball, hanging out in a hired adventurer bullpen somewhere, waiting to enter the game? Were they paid by the day? Was there a Teamsters hiring hall somewhere for apprentice adventurers and journeyman soldiers of fortune? This speculation is, of course, silly, but not as silly as the CIA's pretense that its paid employees are somehow not CIA, but rather contract labor. If the English language means anything, a CIA pilot is someone who makes his living flying for the Central Intelligence Agency. Such people are not freebooting soldiers of fortune, rogue agents, or emissaries from the spiders from Mars. They are employees. The doctrine of plausible deniability is Orwellian doublespeak, a fig leaf which the boys place in front of the secret history, in which CIA plots become a splendidly checkered crew who accepted as a risk of doing business with the CIA the disagreeable fact that it would disavow them if they were caught. When they do get caught, the boys in the Ivy League ties backpedal as fast as their shifty feet can shuffle. The hapless agent caught in the spotlight suddenly becomes an aging former OSS daring doers, and out-of-work Green Beret, or an on-the-make mercenary, anything but an employee. David Ferry and Barry Seal are just two of the more recent in a long line of brainstorming brigades who left their union cards at home when they went to work. They didn't have to ask who their employer was. They knew who they worked for. They worked for George Dool. George Dool created the largest airline in the history of flight. Though little known outside certain circles, George Dool's name deserves to be as famous as those other George de Mohrenschildt and Bush. As the man responsible for airborne plagues which have included the cheap and easy availability of heroin in America's inner cities after Vietnam and the cocaine epidemic of the 1980s, Dool's Spook Air, still headquartered in the desert of Marana, Arizona, was used in operations at the Bay of Pigs in Laos, Vietnam, and on innumerable other black ops. During the 1980s, it will be where Barry Seal will get his planes. Today, it is still there, looming out of the cactus and tumbleweed, a sprawling airplane hangar large enough to house a 747, edging up to the shimmering tarmac of a remote airfield set in shimmering Arizona desert 90 miles south of Phoenix. When CIA proprietary Evergreen Air opened a huge new hangar in 1996, they dubbed it a George A. Dool Aviation Center. They dubbed it the George A. Dool Aviation Center. On a wall inside is a plaque reading George Dool, 1909 to 1985, founder, chief executive officer, board of directors of Air America, Air Asia Company, Civil Air Transport Company. The plaque is the only memorial to the man who created and ran the largest airline in the free world. Evergreen repairs and refits commercial airlines in addition to keeping their hand in the game. They were involved in the mid-90s in in the selling of C-130s, which the Forest Service was supposed to use to help fight the scorching blazes which plagued the western U.S. in summertime, to a Mexican drug cartel. Under Dole, the CIA established a bewildering number of proprietary airlines, asked by then Deputy Director to account for all the planes in Dole's regime. A staffer once spent 3 months on the project before confessing he could never be more than 90% certain. The problem, he explained, was that Dole was forever leasing planes between his shell corporations and changing their markings and tail numbers. In the heyday of the Cold War, Spook Air not only owned more planes than any other airline, but with nearly 20,000 employees, it employed more people than the CIA proper. George Dole's career began when he won a commission in the Army in 1931 and learned to fly. He became a pilot for Pan Am, flying old Ford tri-motors on the Guatemala to Panama run and helping chart new routes through South America, where he almost certainly rubbed elbows with that other conquistador of the air, David Ferry. Along the way, he charted the Pacific Corporation, a CIA front in Delaware, long the boy's corporate domicile of choice. Dole's empire quickly grew to include Air America, Civil Air Transport, Southern Air Transport, and dozens of small puddle jumper lines. Under the cover of legitimate freight and charter services, they supplied a 30,000-man secret army in the mountains of Laos for a 10-year war against the Pathet Lao, dropped scores of agents into Red China, and helped stage revolts in every corner of the globe. Dole's pilots, invariably described as a raffish lot, flew in and out of tiny jungle fields in abysmal weather and under enemy fire. They referred to the CIA as the customer, ammunition as hard rice. Being under heavy fire was sporty. Brushes with death were fascinating. To be absolutely fascinated meant scared witless, professed a writer for Time who covered them. Dole was kept busy traveling the world orchestrating his vast air armada, visible at CIA bases from Vietnam to Panama City. But he stayed aloof from the pilots, many of whom regarded him as a bit of a snob. "I never saw the man without a tie on," scoffed one. All that flying about aroused some curiosity, even in the New York Times, one of whose reporters brashly asked Dole in 1970 if Air America had any connection with the CIA. "If someone out there is behind all this," Dole airily replied, "we don't know about it." Dole died as he had lived, in anonymity. When he passed away in Washington at the age of 75, there was no formal obituary in the Washington Post or the New York Times. No memorial service, no flowers. He was quietly buried at a private funeral in Liberty Isle, I think. And in an article which appeared the year after his death, he was described by Time magazine as a portly, tastefully dressed man. Dole was both reserved as sometimes highly sociable. To Washington society matrons, he seemed the very image of discreet old money. A lifelong bachelor like David Ferry, he often squired wealthy widows to embassy dances in the capital. George Dole? Oh, he was a perfect gentleman, recalled one. At the Chevy Chase Club at a Wasp Bastion in a well-to-do Maryland suburb, Dole liked to while away afternoons playing bridge and backgammon. He usually won. George? Well, he was quite a boy, chuckled a few clubmen, retired Rear Admiral Raymond Hunter. But just what did he do? I rather thought he was in investments, stated one society matron, Margaret Wimsat, told the New York Times he was a bit mysterious. I remember at a party at the Chinese embassy, he spent an awful lot of time talking to the Taiwanese ambassador. I asked him why, and he just said we had a lot to talk about. He would sort of peer at you through those thick black-rimmed glasses. Once she recalled she mentioned the name Richard Helms, former director of the CIA. Do you know him from the Chevy Chase Club? She inquired. Oh, I know him better than that, said Dool. Dool's airline empire was known by half a dozen different names. During Vietnam, it was sometimes called the Shy Airline. Shy Air flew where few tourists wanted to go. Passengers were often obliged to exit by parachute, and some of its cargo would probably be unwelcome if it were to turn up in the bridge mix at a society matron's card party. In the public revulsion against covert operations after Watergate, after the extent of the CIA's covert operations were revealed by newspapers to the American public, the agency was forced to dismantle Dool's huge aerial empire and sell off the various planes and airfields, but the empire struck back. Representative Otis Pike, who chaired some of the committee hearings, had himself been a World War II Marine fighter pilot and was a moderate but highly independent Democrat who represented a rock-solid Republican district on Long Island where he was regularly reelected with ease. Until he undertook the investigation of the boys' sordid behavior, the boys proceeded to make an example of a patriotic congressman. Pike was defeated in the very next election after a smear campaign that would have made a Stalinist commissar blush. Outside money had poured into Pike's district as a warning to any future politicians who might have the temerity to exercise oversight over the apparatus of the national security state. Today, the airfield with the huge hangar bearing George Dool's name shimmering in the Arizona desert sun seems perfectly ordinary and unexceptional, rather like the George Dool who enjoyed playing bridge at the Chevy Chase Club and dancing with wealthy widows. There is probably nothing remarkable about the reports of unmarked black Chinook helicopters that take off regularly from a far corner of the airfield headed south. And although Mr. Dool's connections with the CIA and his role in founding the agency's air operations have been documented in books and by congressional reports, the CIA does not acknowledge the relationship. According to a spokesman at the agency headquarters at Langley, Mr. Dool's name is not listed on any official file. Officially, the CIA says it has no record that Dool ever worked there. If you check with them, they'll tell you the same thing about David Ferry and Barry Seal. And that's it for Chapter 7.